Hello and welcome to this week's YouTube video. Every 4 weeks I do a Procreate video where I try and transfer my fine art painting skills to Procreate. This week I thought I'd show you how I painted this cat enjoying a sunny spot. This one is not as tricky as it looks. The important thing about this painting is working in value and temperature blocks. Before we start, let's have a look at the brushes I used. The brushes were the wet acrylic, the turpentine brush, the carbon stick and the Derwent pencil. I also used a couple of non-Procreate brushes, which I bought from Tip Top Brushes. These were the Blend Stump Wax Brush and the Fine Wet Liner, both from their Pro Oil Paint set. These are both really wet brushes like the turpentine brush but without the streaky effect, so they are good for destroying edges. Notice that the brushes I am using all make different marks. If you look at the reference photo that I have used, you'll notice that I have not developed the sofa or this area of my cat. How much you choose to develop in your reference photo is up to you, but to achieve a painterly feel, you are best off leaving some areas unfinished. As a general rule, you can underdevelop anything outside the area of interest. You do this by editing out the detail and losing edges. So bear this compositional trick in mind as I talk you through the painting process. You can load up your photo onto your canvas by selecting the spanner, canvas, reference and then import your image. This then gives you an ability to use your colour picker to help you select the colour. A word of caution, not all of your brushes paint true to the colour you choose. For example, the wet brushes are lighter and so you will have to adjust by going darker and maybe more saturated. Also, do not get bogged down in trying to replicate the image colour, pixel by pixel. Just use it to get an idea of what you are looking at and then adjust if you need to. I choose my colour by eye, but this is a way that will help you if you are struggling with seeing the colour. Put your reference photo on your top layer and start a new layer and draw around the main details. You will be able to use this as a drawing guide throughout the painting, and it will allow you to be more expressive with your strokes without worrying if your drawing is going awry. If you want to practice your drawing, you can do this first freehand and then use this method to check how far out you are. Looking at the layers panel, I've done this painting in 8 layers. You can see I've kept the background separate from the cat. I've done the bulk of the cat on one layer, but then done small details on new layers. Generally, as a rule, I like to preserve the majority of my blocking on one layer. Then if I start messing up past this point, it is easy to delete the layer and start again. But beyond that, I start a new layer every time I've done a section I'm happy with. Let's now have a look at the video. For my background, I started with the Blend Stump Wax Brush and I'm just making some strokes where I'm varying the saturation of my blue. So I'm placing grey besides a stronger teal, but both the same value. This gives me a temperature shift and makes my background a bit more interesting. I then switch to my turpentine brush on about 80% opacity and make 2 or 3 large strokes, top and bottom, to give me that lovely painterly feel. Notice how much of that is preserved in the final painting. I switch to my wet acrylic on about 80% opacity and begin to block in my cat in the average value and temperature I think I see. I then use my Blend Stump Wax Brush to start destroying my edges. I am either pulling my background colour into my cat or my cat colour into my background. I switch back to my wet acrylic at about 80% opacity and begin to block in my cat's values and temperatures more accurately. I switch to the carbon stick because I want softer brush strokes. Again, I'm on about 80% opacity, but if I press harder with my pencil tool, the colour I lay is darker. So I'm just using the pressure sensitivity appropriately, judging it all by eye. Notice that my strokes aren't that small and they are quite vigorous. I'm working fast and not labouring over it. You don't want to overpaint it. Lots of small strokes will give it an overworked appearance at this point. I switch back to the wet acrylic to put in my nose and then use the fine wet liner to put in the eyes. I am doing the eyes and nose on a separate layer. And then it really is the case of just getting those value blocks and temperature blocks in as few strokes as possible. Notice the detail you see in the chest and shoulder area of my reference photo is not present in my artwork. It's not necessary for the sort of painting I am attempting to create. Getting the values and the temperatures correct is more important than detail, so bear this in mind if you start to get bogged down in painting detail. You are better off working in blocks. For example, block 1, mid-value plus cool temperature. Block 2, value change plus temperature change, warm. Block 3, value change plus temperature change, cool. Then once you have these blocks firmly established, you can start adding detail. This is the point when I start adding new layers. Notice once I've established those 3 blocks, I start to sort out my edges. I soften this edge down here with the Blend Stump wax brush. The edge is pretty much lost into the sofa. It's at this point I decide I'm not going to put any detail into my sofa, and I'm going to use those marks I made really early on to just suggest it. This is why it is so important not to overpaint your artwork early on, because those interesting strokes you lay initially will give you more options if you haven't covered them with lots of small brushwork. I start a new layer and begin to work on the main ear in a bit more detail using my wet acrylic brush. I'm trying to make sure I'm getting the saturation of those pinks right. Remember, this is a wet brush and it will not paint true, so I'm having to do this by eye, constantly comparing my reference photo and my artwork side by side. I make both photos the same size on my screen. This will enable me to check my temperatures are right. We call this the sight size method. I then squint to check my values are correct. Squinting reduces the artwork down to very obvious value blocks. If anything is out, you'll see it by doing this. I then switch to my turpentine brush at about 80% opacity. I begin to work into the face, chin and neck area. I'm using much smaller strokes. The turpentine brush is great for giving that fur effect with not much effort. You may have to attempt brush strokes more than once. Very often I do a stroke, it's not quite right, I undo it, maybe adjust my brush size and opacity a little and have another go. I use exactly the same method as before for checking my values and my temperatures. I add extra detail to my nose using the wet acrylic, and the detail in my eyes is done with a fine wet liner. You'll notice I haven't touched any of these areas from my initial blocking. I don't think it's necessary. Again, this is personal taste. You may want to take your artwork further. It's up to you. There is no right or wrong. But be prepared to make decisions as you go along and as it develops. If you like an area, then leave it and move on to another area that you perhaps feel isn't working as well. For the whiskers, I start a new layer and then draw them in with the Derwent pencil. I then take my rubber, turn the opacity right down to about 15% and start rubbing at the edges. This will give you that whiskery effect that you see in my final painting. To recap then, use a selection of brushes that make different marks. Use a drawing guide to help keep your drawing correct. Understand the limitations of the colour picker and be prepared to work from eye. Block in your main values and temperatures first. Use the sight size method and squinting to help you. Do not overpaint your artwork in the blocking stage. Use as few brush strokes as you can. Add your detail on subsequent layers. Add as much as you personally like, but remember, unfinished areas and lost edges will give you a more painterly feel. I hope you've enjoyed today's video and found it useful. Please like and subscribe if you can, and check out my website sarahhallidayart.com, where you will find examples of my work and also details of online classes that I run. Thank you for watching and see you for the next one.